everyone. My name is Medha Pratap, and I'm the Senior Solutions Marketing Manager here at One World Sync. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today on connecting the label to e-commerce. We'll be covering how it's possible to deliver rich, robust product content directly from the package to the palms of consumers' hands. And you'll be able to take advantage of our enhanced Product Information Cloud platform with expanded offerings to improve your global commerce capabilities available to you today. If you have a large number of participants, your line will remain muted, but you will definitely have an opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A or chat panel. Please raise your hand, but leave your line muted, and we'll get to these at the very end. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Tammy O'Donnell. She's our VP of Professional Services at One World Sync, and Stephen Kaufman, who's the Chief Product Officer at Blue Software, our presenters who will be kicking off our session today. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you that are joining us today. Super excited to join Stephen and get this opportunity to talk about the trends in purchasing behaviors and product content demands, the impact this is having on brand owners, the product content opportunity, and finally, to share how Blue and One World Sync are positioned to offer a best-in-class solution. So let's get started. Surprise to anyone when we talk about the shift in consumer purchasing behavior. We're all concerned, right? Ever interested in detailed product content in making purchasing decisions. We put more trust in those manufacturers and that provide access to complete and easy to understand ingredient definitions on our products. And more than consumers in America would actually pay more for products that contain ingredients we understand. In our purchasing behaviors, the demand for rich content is growing. I mean, think about it. What do you want to have access to when you're making purchasing decisions these days? Is reviews, those. What about those great 360 views of the product? The demand comes from, let me build for you, guys. It also comes from government regulations. As the regulations on food products continue to expand, readers and e-tailers need rich content, not just to manage their store operations and supply needs, but also online presence. And of course, demand of us, right, the consumer, and our demand for transparency. To get this, brand owner needs to focus on many things. Brand consistency, having a single source of truth, ensuring consistency in all markets, which lead to a revenue lift and cost savings. Retention, being compliant with regulations by having a trusted source of information, avoid recalls and fines while optimizing cost. Globalization, addressing regional requirements to get to this faster with that on-brand messaging, and a repeatable process. This is a must, right? A repeatable process that reduces waste and creates efficiencies. And thus, to product content in real time to meet e-com demands. So a lot right, but what if you don't? What's the impact of getting it wrong, of not having consistent product content, of non-compliant or meeting your consumer demands for the content they want to see? Well, here's examples of the impact. Calls can happen if you have a lack of governance on your product content. A read can cost an organization millions of dollars, and the cost increases if there's loss of production or missed revenue or lawsuits. What's the retailers dissatisfied? Situations where you lose shelf space, launching, and so on due to bad, missing, or incomplete data. Brands are losing money at the shelf. The Guardian states this can be $25 million in loss. They state $1 billion can be in missed opportunity cost when consumers experience incorrect claims, incorrect data, or just missing information that allow them to make a decision on the brand. With that, I'll turn it over to Stephen to talk about how Blue and WorldSync can help address these challenges.
Tammy. I know that many of the people on the phone are aware not just of some of the truths that Tammy just spoke about. I think looking at the slide, the overall complexity, not just of the specific data that a consumer might hold in their hand when they're making a purchasing decision, but just the amount of data in general. So some of this data on the screen that we see from groups within a consumer product or a health science company or even a retailer's own branding could come from regulatory marketing. We've got legal, operations, and printing. These specific groups might not exactly match, but probably closely match what most of the people on the line, the different departments that they're pushing information in and out of the package. And then I think what we'll show when we look at the next slide after we pass these departments, you'll see the complexity of the data, and I know that many people that I speak to that are in the position of having to manage all of this data coming from all these different directions and changing at different speeds in different markets and so on, understand what a daunting challenge this is. However, we believe that a lot of the technology that is coming to play, both using Blue, WorldSync, and some other tools in the market, can really help organize this. I think, Tammy, one of the most things you said is repeatable process. If we don't have repeatable process, then it's very, very difficult, probably almost impossible to manage this kind of data. In speaking specifically about the data that's consumer-bound, the top three departments, the regulatory, the legal, and the marketing, most of that data is what's got to flow either to an online website, to a retailer's website, to a site like Smart Label. There's also this other information that's a little more supply chain or specification-oriented, operational and printing data. But I think the most important thing to remember is that the groups that have been building this data on these packages have often been doing so for multiple decades. And those processes are highly refined because by mass producing a package, what a company is basically stating is they have a very, very high belief that the data is correct. I think that with the advent of the Internet, the idea that all data on the Internet has to be right all the time was a little bit damaged by the idea that it can be so quickly changed. So if I put up a website and there's incorrect data on the website, it seems conceivable that I could just change it. But the fact is, with the volume of data and with the speed with which it moves, and the fact that your data be moving on platforms that you don't own because it proliferates through other systems, making that change is not so easy. We also know that with the advent of European regulations such as EU 1169, that now there's a mandate that states that the data in the package must be identical to data that's available online. So this graphic in particular, I think, helps us explain not only to ourselves but to others in our organization the level of the challenge that we're facing as we want to move all of these attributes into the next space. I can go to the next one, Tammy. Next here. So what we want to do with that data, of course, is essentially create what we've been terming a digital twin of the physical product, so that with that data we can create something much like the image on the left side. We can basically take the flat two-dimensional label and wrap it on a wireframe and then create virtual photography before the product's produced. In that way, we're not waiting until the product is manufactured. The most common process for gathering the data that you see on the right today is to wait for manufacturing and often have somebody even physically go into a warehouse, open a case with a box cutter, pull the product out, and send it to a third party to gather and collect all of the data that you see on the right. And sometimes that can be weeks and even months after the product's been built far too late to be providing an aggressive e-retailer with the information they need to try to get the information in consumers' hands as the product is released or even beforehand. So we've got this digital twin image on the left, pardon me, and we have a digital twin label on the right with some of the information that we know is precious to the process. Not only this, other data that may not specifically be printed on the package but evolves organically as the package is being developed by marketing teams. That might be statements like why buy statements. Why would the consumer buy this product in a convenience environment or a big box environment or a grocery environment or an online e-tailing environment, etc. There's information like partner branding. We mentioned product photography. There could be related products. So if you buy this, you might also like. That type of data sometimes evolves during package development. And something that Tammy mentioned earlier in her brand, in her mention of global harmonization, is segmentation communication, because we're saying different things to different markets at different times. There's offers, coupon codes, and social marketing messaging. So all of this data, not just this very specific digital label data, but all of this data is very valuable and can flow into One World Sync's product information cloud and then out into other retail spaces. So let's go to the next one, Tammy. So the example of how this data might lay out in a particular retailer, obviously this could be a Walmart site or Amazon site or another site, but compelling photography and relevant offers, and accurate data is really what the presentation today is about. I think what we've seen in the industry is that we've been quite good at moving supply chain data behind the scenes to handle things like distribution and logistics information. But what we're still learning to do deftly is to move this B2B data formally to a new, fast-moving B2C world. Thank you, Timmy. To give you a visual that might help kind of pull this together as we pull towards the back end of our message today, is that Blue and One World Sync's product information cloud together can give you a very streamlined and repeatable approach to getting B2B and B2C content. This helps you improve your time to market for all the reasons that we've talked about today, using this repeatable process to move confidently from spot to spot. The right first time metric is probably the most important metric that I hear our customers talk about. How often, what percentage of times do they either generate a new product or make a minor or a moderate modification to an existing product and push it to all the people that need to see it and approve it and have it approved the first time that it's pushed through. I think industry metrics tell us that the average there is around 2.5 to 2.7, and often we see packaging would be routed as many as 5 or 6 times, and in worst case, I've seen more than 10. I'm sure some of you have some horror stories for just how things can bounce back and forth between different groups that have different ideas. So this repeatable process is very important to getting high RFT and an earlier digital release. With Blue, we've had clients see as much as a 50% reduction in packaging error and a 30% reduction in their overall cycle time by reducing the cycle times themselves and getting higher RFT. And the back end of this, using One World Sync as a single source of distribution. So if we look at the chart beneath, we know that some of the data is generated in brand or marketing themselves, but a lot of the data is sourced either directly or indirectly from some upstream systems like PLM tools, product lifecycle management, sources, ERP systems like SAP, etc. So some of that data has been concocted into digital design briefs or Word files that are passed and emailed. A lot of information may be emailed, but I think we're coming to a place, at least with Blue's customers, who are being asked to retrieve that data accurately and dynamically from those upstream systems so that they're not cut and pasted from documents or delivered verbally or in other ways that might introduce error into the data stream. Many times Blue might push that data to be aggregated by a PIM system, a product information management system that's typically housed within the consumer product or pharmaceutical or retailer. But at the end of the day, this accurate data can be synchronized and moved over into One World Sync's product information cloud, and from that point of aggregation, it can be validated and then syndicated out to the retail channels that you see on the right, eventually reaching the consumer. The timeline that's related with that, the current state timeline can take quite a long while. So we've got 6 months, 3 months, 3, 6. In today's environment, the concept of taking upwards of a year and a half or two is just not acceptable in the fast-moving world that we have today. So the new timelines that we need to see are 3 months getting back-end data right, a month at the maximum moving that out into the cloud, and then varying times to move it to retailers, sometimes depending on their systems and how quickly they can version the product. One more thing I'm going to mention and then move back to Tammy is that, as many of you know, there's not just a single version of the product in this pipeline. There could be one version that's out on a retail shelf. There could be another that's being introduced next week, but that data is already stored and housed in Product Information Cloud, and maybe we've even got a third version that we're currently working on, either in our back-end data systems or in Blue, getting the last touches on the artwork. So these systems not only have to move data on a product across the stream from left to right, but have to be able to manage multiple versions moving in parallel in and out of this process. With that, Tammy, let me come back to you, and I know you've got a great summary slide to talk about how Blue and One World Sync work together.
Great, Stephen. Great information about how Blue's advanced label and artwork management solution stores that final, approved, and audited digital file with all that rich product data. If you put that together with One World Sync's capabilities around understanding recipient requirements and validations, along with product data syndication, allowing for distribution of that data across an organization's different trading networks, showing that the two together can really deliver the right content to the right recipient in the right format, in the right method, and at the right time. A best-in-class solution. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to you to manage any questions we might have.
Sure. It looks like we do have a few questions right off the bat. So our first question is, how sure that I'm getting the right package data in the hands of consumers globally?
To address that, do you want to take that?
That'd be great. Thanks. Sorry, I was on.
Sure, that's all right. Yes, so I know that it's a multi-step process. The idea is to verify the data in the different stages that the data exists. And so when sourcing the data, if we have a single source of the proof, like a single source of the truth, like we looked at in the slide, rather than systems that house competing data sources. The first part is very important. Let me give you a good example. So supply chain data be housed in a system. If I'm just thinking of a simple net weight statement, say I have a box of cereal and its net weight statement is 16 ounces. And so in supply chain data, I've got a label that says net weight, and then I have a field that says 8, and then I have another field that says unit, and in that field might say OZ period, or it might say ounces. So that supply chain data to be consumed by systems to give information to supply chain systems, but a consumer needs a string and a set of characters that says, and I'll put it in quotes, open quote, net, NET period, space, O lowercase z period, space, 16, end quote. And so that's the consumer readable string. And so part of verifying data and ensuring that consumers have the right data is making sure that the data is A, accurate, but B, is in a format that humans read. And it seems like a very obvious statement, but I can tell you that many, many times we see data as people try to join it together or tear it apart, it gets bastardized or damaged along the way. So the first part of that step is making sure the upstream data is accurate, making sure that it's in a human readable format, as I just mentioned, and of course that's only English. You have to get into how it's being translated. Secondly, make sure that the systems that are passing the data from system to system have ways to validate the data before and after after it's received. So if I have data in blue and I have a way to validate, typically having either humans or automated systems validating the data, that helps me on the source side. Once it gets into the cloud, like the One World Sync Product Information Cloud, there are additional validations that can occur in that space. And then ideally, in the third step where retailers are hosting the data, they also have systems to validate. But the word that the question used, ensure, is a strong word. And so I think one of the most, probably one of the most solid ways we can ensure that data is right is we have a validated piece of packaging artwork, version 1, and we're moving it to version 2, and say we're making only a small change. Let's say we're changing the net weight from 16 ounces to 18 ounces. There are many tools, particularly Blue's V-proofing system and others, that can overlay the first version of the artwork with the second and show a reader or somebody doing this validation that the only thing that changed in that package was that net weight value, that value from 16 to 18. Because what often happens when we're revising something is we're focused on that change from 16 to 18, and something else moves. The nature of production, packaging artwork and Illustrator, and the fact that we use different fonts and graphics, and it gets moved from person to person on desktop computer to desktop computer, the very nature of that process, and it was a process that I've been involved in for over 20 years, is that little things do move and things do change. So being able to get a solid version 1 and then always use that as a reference point is another very powerful way to ensure product accuracy, both of the visual and the data going out off the visual as you move through this process.
A little bit to that as well.
Yeah.
Because the question might even be around understanding the attributes and the way that the organization might be calling them or defining them, and how recipient is defining them. Some of it could even be that mapping and understanding the requirements of the recipient that's asking for that data. And certainly from a One World Sync perspective, that's a very strong area for us, relating the attributes and the way that you might define them to what the recipient is looking for as well.
The recipient could be the retailer recipient, or ultimately could even be the consumer's interpretation of the data reading their smartphone.
Exactly. Or any regulatory body that's looking for data as well. So.
Cool. It looks like we have another question. I think, Stephen, this one is for you. Beverly Van Pelt from Dole Fresh Vegetables says, I'm using Blue software now. I'm using Blue software now, and is this a software module, plugin, or how do we connect?
Sure. Well, so Blue has a module called Blue Connect, and Blue Connect allows any of our customers with the Blue platform to not only move data from their own internal systems of record, like the SAP system we mentioned earlier, but also allows for outbound data. So we have a specific adapter that can move data into One World Sync's data environment. We've gone through a full data certification process here at Blue Software that was validated by One World Sync. And that basically takes the XML at the right step in the Blue process. So those of you that use Blue know there's multiple steps, and some performed by humans and some automated. And in this particular workflow, we get to a point where we're ready to push the data out, and we transform the data into an XML standard that is One World Sync's XML standard to push data to their product information cloud. So what it would require on Dole's part would be owning the Blue Connect module and owning the One World Sync adapter. And I can certainly have somebody in our team reach out to Dole and discuss that.
Awesome. Question is, how long does it take between the time we approve a package and the time that approved data is ready for distribution?
I'll answer that. I think distribution could be looked at in a couple of ways. So from Blue's standpoint, once the data is, once the product is approved, so you've got the different folks quality, legal, regulatory that you saw earlier, once they approve it, we can bind that data in the XML and push it out in a matter of seconds. However, that's now going to move in the use case we're discussing today into One World Sync's product information cloud. And Tammy, maybe you can talk about the speed with which you can deliver that into the e-tail channels and the retail channels.
So, you know, absolutely real time as well as you publish that data out. But, you know, what could come into play is that we also do validation. So if there are any discrepancies or not meeting requirements and things like that, that could certainly take on a process and some time there to ensure that you're meeting the recipient that you're publishing that data to their requirements. But from a system process perspective, it's real time.
Maybe if I'm understanding it as an example, you know, in the rainbow and unicorn world, all the data that was delivered would be accurate and would meet all the requirements of every e-retailer, and in that world, it would all push out instantly. What I'm understanding from you is that in some cases, let's say I've got a particular field that Kroger requires and it's missing or inaccurate. At that point, you may kick off a process to get that field corrected and fixed, and then the time would then be relative to how quickly it could be corrected, either by a person or a process.
Cool. And next question is, what seems to cause brands the most headaches? Is it the data or is it the images, and why?
I would say the data. Go ahead, Tammy. Yeah, I would say
a hard answer, right?
Yeah, my experience is probably the data. The image is difficult, but the image, if I've got finished, approved artwork, and that's converted to a PDF, and then I can take that PDF and do what we discussed as photography, or even take a shot of the product. I've got to manage it, and then I have to manage the color space. So if you think about the image might be fantastic when printed on a color Heidelberg press at Supply X, but it may look great on a Samsung and crappy on an iPhone, or good on a Mac and bad on Windows. So all that stuff is complicated, but it is an image, or it might be 5 images. The data that we looked at, where you call that data explosion, there might be 100 data points that are all moving at different rates of speed and owned, not even in our own companies, but sometimes owned by partners. So let's say I've got a still, and I'm doing a co-promotion with Disney, and Disney wants its characters on the package, but they're still releasing the movie, and they don't know which shots of the characters are going to release. You know, you get so many moving parts for some of that data. They're both challenging, but I'd probably at the end say the metadata is a little bit tougher. What do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is that there's so much data that's being asked for, and if you don't have a data governance process where you have owners for each of those pieces of data or attributes, that gets really cumbersome. But I think once you have that process down and you have owners, then you're going to get some real efficiencies there. So I think the answer sort of depends on where you are in that process.
Metadata, we talked a good bit today about the mapping of the data. So when we have a piece of data, it's with a label. Different retailers have different labels for the same data, and then sometimes they have the same label for different data. And that gets really, really complicated. I know that's something that you guys are experts in at One World Sync, Tammy, and we deal with quite a lot also. It's just trying to get some clarity, and even if we just start in English, on what the labeling of the data is and what the data is, and trying to get people to wrap themselves around some of the standards, like some of the GS1 standards for labeling. There's not a super high degree of compliance there, and I think in some cases retailers are differentiating intentionally, creating new fields of data for consumers that others don't have, so that it's not all uniform, and that of course, that's a two-edged sword. It helps them differentiate from other retail competitors, but it makes more and more difficult for the consumer product manufacturer to deliver that data because it's different for every single channel.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah. A lot of chatter, but I would say really important to really think about that repeatable process, and you need to start somewhere. And certainly when I look at the process of the attributes that are available on the package, that Blue can certainly support that process. If not doing something like that, it's a really great place to start because it's, information is very valuable and everybody needs that stuff, right? They want a different valid value for the unit measure or something. You can always work toward that, but it's this rich content. You got to start somewhere, and to me, the packaging, you got to get that stuff right because that has so many implications if you get it wrong.
One thing that I think we're starting to see in many of our customers, and I think we saw this, Tammy, I know we just did a user conference that you guys presented at, and I'm starting to see the marketing team come, but they're accompanied by data specialists, taxonomists, and ontologists, and those are library science terms that are very left brain oriented. So typically you think of marketing and branding as right brain folks that are very concerned with the emotion and the energy and the visuals. And they all deal with data, but they may not have the same passion for accurate data that somebody with a library science degree or a background in, as I said, taxonomy and ontology have. So the joining of that right brain type person with that left brain type person in data delivery is starting to evolve, and I think is a really important, maybe hidden part of the solution here.
Good point.
Okay, I think we have a few more questions. So the next one is, one of your slides showed a number of departments as stakeholders. What organizational structure have you seen that has been the most successful at managing and executing this very large and ongoing project?
I think probably both have answers there because you both dealt for a long, long time with a lot of successful best practice organizations. My quick answer from the Blue software side would be that's going to partly depend on the market. So our pharmaceutical customers treat the labeling often as a branch of manufacturing. They see the label as a part on a bill of materials. It's very highly regulated, so that supply chain and marketing function kind of operating beneath manufacturing seems to work quite tightly together and quite well together. I think if I go to consumer products and retail markets, there are some different structures, but every time we see a success in managing this type of data, it typically has a couple of hallmarks. One hallmark is a passionate, high-level sponsor that has a horizontal responsibility across multiple departments. So what doesn't work is just getting those 5 departments. We had regulatory, legal, operations, marketing, I think there was one other, to just have these say, you guys all go in a room and sit in that room for 3 days, and you guys just all agree on how to do this and come back and tell me when it's done. Even when all parties are willing and all parties are collaborative, there are hard decisions that have to be made that are going to either inconvenience one department or inconvenience the other, or create a process that's too complex, etc. So in every case where we've seen success, we have somebody who's willing at an EVP or a VP level to own this, to roll their sleeves up, to come into the room with those groups and help those groups work through issues that invariably will arise. And then once the system is launched, champion the change that's needed within the organization until there's a success. And that success doesn't come day one. I've seen success come day 30. I've seen success come day 90. I've seen success come day 360. But in every case, we need that sponsor to make sure that everybody stays aligned during that period of cultural and process change. And Tammy, I'll let you answer because I know you guys have done a lot of this.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. You know, it differs by organization for sure. I think other really key there is that regardless of the org structure, that you have a process in place where you have data governance. It will be across those different departments. You know, you will have data owners of different attributes against different departments. So it's really important to have a very good process to manage that and govern it, and make sure that if, you know, that someone isn't, the data owner isn't touching those attributes, you know, regulatory attributes and things like that. So, you know, we have definitely seen a lot of different org structures, and it seems to be changing a lot more now as well, because typically e-com has been sort of a separate division, and now trying to bring all that together into one process to manage the data is what we're seeing a lot of trends around, trying to really bring that together and not act in these different silos.
I've seen e-commerce groups, like you're saying, being merged, at least functionally merged, somewhat back towards marketing and branding. I've also seen groups that are driving innovation or strategy, kind of taking some ownership here, helping through some of the changes that need to be made, because many companies have been built for years to efficiently manufacture packaging through a print supply chain process, and that has not been built initially to begin to dynamically share that data throughout the process and validate it with external stakeholders. It's built to efficiently make, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of a particular product on a printing and converting cycle. So all the things you mentioned are important. This ownership is important, and this recognition there are cultural and process impacts all along the way.
Awesome. Question is, does your adapter work with NAV 2016?
I don't believe we have a current client NAV 2016. That's something that I'd be glad to follow up on. I know there's contact information at the end here. We do convert blue metadata into a variety of XML formats, IPC XML. We have converted into SPL, which is a health science format, GS1 XML, One World Sync XML. Essentially, we have an engine that can output to a variety of XML formats, but I'd have to look more closely at that particular one.
Okay, no problem. Our next question is, how do you digitize information or data that ends up on the image but not from the source system? For example, claims or romance copy.
Okay, and so there's basically can be three sources of trying to gather our consumer data. One is that I get it from a validated database upstream from my marketing and package production process, but that's the future state for many people on the phone. That's not current state. The next thing we often see are documents, either document sourced internally or externally, maybe called a design brief, and the data is gathered and hand keyed in by somebody in marketing or closely related to marketing. But in this case, I believe the question is, I've got a printed package and I want to get it off the package. And in that world, there's a couple methods. One is there are companies that will take photography, will actually physically shoot that, essentially put on a piece of felt and rotate it, and send those images to a third party who will read and hand key the data back into a database. And there are some technologies that can scan and read the data. Typically, those fall under a category called OCR, optical character recognition. But the accuracy of OCR is not great. It depends on the contrast of the text on the package, and in a variety of things. Is the text on a curve? Is it in a crazy, funky font? There's a number of reasons that it doesn't work that well. So then that OCR output winds up in the hands of somebody anyway that's got to, if not completely rekey it, tweak it, and check it. So I would say that OCR process is difficult. I know we've been working in R&D for quite a long time and trying to make that, 98, 99% accurate, but I think OCR is probably at best in the low 90s. Those are the different methods that I have. I hope that I answered the question for the after.
Okay, it looks like we have just 2 last questions left. I'll get to. So the first one is, how can I ensure that the version information on the label doesn't get desynchronized between the product on the market shelf that's version 1 from version 2 product information sync platform?
Yeah, I totally get that, and that is that's one that we deal with, and One World Sync does all the time. I'm sure we could do a 3-day seminar on that. That's a great question. There's a few key things I'll mention in the amount of time that we have here. One is that it's very important to actually have a label version, preferably actually printed somewhere on the package. It doesn't have to be consumer readable. It can be under a flap. It can be hidden. But every piece of artwork with even the smallest change in content should be incremented with type of serial number, and the vast majority of our customers have that. So that's one piece. Another piece is making sure that the process is capable of incrementing not only the data on the package and that number we just talked about, that serial number, but that all of the data associated with that package release is versioned or has a way to version a set of data. So if I think of a traditional design brief that was often in Word or Excel, I have a file and I could say this file is version 3 and it maps to serial number XYZ of this package. That's document world, document to document. But in the data world, it's more complex because, as we've said, and as the questioner probably knows, all of those pieces of data are changing at different times. So in blue, we've got a digital design brief that can be frozen and versioned and basically orchestrated with the piece of art. And so from the standpoint of us delivering to One World Sync a piece of art and data that match that piece of art, we can do that push both the graphics and the data. And then, Timmy, I know you guys have to take that and then start working that process through to the GDSN cloud, which is now with the, I believe, the release 3, and I'll let you talk about it, is able to start managing versioned product data. So can you take it there out to the consumer?
So actually, versions and variations is a very big hot topic, and GDSN is looking at that right now to determine what decisions they're going to make on how that should be implemented. I think some of the I guess difficulty or opportunity, I would say, is also around not just receiving the versions, right, from even sending us a version, One World Sync, but even if we did that today, if the recipients aren't going to agree on how or understand a best practice on how to handle that data, or if they're how they're going to handle it, even individually, if they decide to or not, impacts what the question was about, and that means on shelf, right? Because that means what's the recipient doing with that data when they get it, that version? Are they managing the version? So first comes the technology piece to support it, but the implementation. And I feel with the direction and so much focus that we're getting on this, that 2018 is definitely going to be a year where that's going to be the technology components, I believe, will be put in place. And then it will be a matter of implementing it across the different recipients that receive that data and what they do with that data. Because that really, If technology can handle it, that's just one piece of it, and it's not really the most important piece, right? It's the implementation of it to ensure that that data is being represented correctly.
Yeah, many times I've heard somebody who's a data analyst, they'll just say kind of flippantly, we'll just increment the G10, just change the G10, right? Every time you change the product, change the G10. And then I know many of the people on the phone just spit coffee on their screen because that relates with so many other things like most retailers charge for G10, and just changing the G10 just creates a cascading effect. Another method is the QR code. So if you have a QR code on a package, the QR code can go specifically to a URL endpoint of product information. If you change the product at all, the information, you could increment the QR code and without changing the G10 and push the consumer through the QR code to the proper information. But it doesn't really help you in all use cases. It just helps you where you have a QR code and you have a back end to drive the consumer to an experience where they'd read the accurate data. And I think, Tam, to reiterate what you said, the technology in some cases has got some gaps that we're still working through for 2018. It's probably something for us to all stay tuned with to try to make this easier.
Great. Our last question is, what if I have some data in SAP and some in PLM and some in marketing? How does it all get pulled together?
Yeah, so on our side, when we're sourcing data from these different systems, the technical term is that we're looking for something that we call a primary key between the system delivering us the data and our system. So in SAP, sometimes that might be a G10, but it might be something like a material master code, something where I can make a hard link between the data that the ERP system is delivering to Blue and the actual shipping product. And then if I go to PLM system, I may be looking for a different primary key, like they might have a master product ID or something else. Now, in best case state, the IT group that owns these systems has already worked this out, and I'm just querying all the systems with a G10. In other words, Blue is saying, okay, SAP, please give me all the accurate data for this G10 version 1. And then ask the same question to PLM and the same question to maybe a marketing system or an MDM system. But the reality is that those primary keys typically don't exist across all the systems. And in that case, we're querying each system with the data that we're given by that manufacturer to get that data from the back-end system. So to simplify that sentence, which is a little bit of a train wreck, I ask the SAP system with a material master. I ask PLM because I'm given a global product ID code. And for each system, I've got to figure out what that mapping is, and we do that through a discovery process early on. I aggregate the data that's in Blue, and then in many cases, One World Sync is not only drawing data from Blue, but you too might be drawing some data from other systems like PIM systems. So you've got to essentially perform the same function that I just mentioned on your end, correct?
Right. Yep.
It looks like that's it for now, but thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you, Tammy, for presenting, and thank you to our listeners for attending today. A copy of the deck and a recording will be made available to you after the call. Please visit the One World Sync website and the Blue website. Our contact information is up on the screen, and you can learn more about our upcoming product content initiatives. Have a very good rest of your day. Thank you.